Hi friends, Robin here from Cheese from Scratch, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you guys some of the equipment that I have for cheese making and what I feel is your must-haves and what is maybe the things that you could get away with maybe not having right off the bat, maybe not having at all, and just kind of dividing it into those types of categories so that when you are just starting cheese making or just kind of getting set up, you know what it is that you really need to have and what you can save your money for later. So when I look for a cheese pot, you're going to want to look for a cheese pot that would kind of fit the amount of milk that you plan on mostly processing. So it's a good idea to kind of think, am I going to be doing 4-gallon batches? Am I going to be typically doing 8-gallon batches, 2-gallon batches? And pick a pot size that is going to meet those needs just a little bit larger than that batch size that you're planning on making. And the reason for that is you don't want to get a pot that is ginormously big if you're planning on mostly just doing like 2-gallon batches. And the reason for that is that the thermometer, it's nice if it can click to the side of your pot, and then you can just have it clicked on there and it can actually reach the milk. And this is actually a pretty long thermometer, so it kind of depends on your thermometer, but you want it to actually be able to reach your milk when it's on the side of the pot, and that's going to keep you from having to be like, oh, I'm just going to test the temperature. And with cheese making, there's a lot of testing the temperature as you go, so it's nice to have a thermometer that's just in the pot constantly. You can constantly touch the milk. So my pot has rivets inside it. It's a little bit dirty. My cows are dry right now, so I will definitely sterilize this before I start making cheese with it again. But mine has rivets inside. You can get ones that don't have rivets. If you want to spend a little bit more money, you can get like the welded on ones. I don't mind rivets, but you do want to pay special attention to cleaning them when you are sanitizing your pots. So just take a toothbrush and get in those little crevices because they can be points of entry for contamination. I like to go for a heavy bottom pot. This one is pretty heavy, and that's going to help me with temperature controlled. Although when I first started making cheese, I actually just used my enamel canning pot, like my enamel water bath canner. It wasn't ideal. The walls were very thin. It was very hard to do heat regulation in that pot, but it did work, and I made quite a bit of cheese just in that canning pot. So, you know, you can make do with what you have. One thing I'll caution against is getting 2 pots. So for example, say you want to do a 4-gallon batch of cheese and you have 2 pots that are 2 gallons. So you're like, oh, I can just use both pots. When you're making long stirring time cheeses like cheddars or Colbys or Goudas or any of those harder press type cheeses, you're going to have a lot of stirring time. And so it's going to be kind of hard to have yourself divided between 2 different pots. So it's nice if your milk is all in one spot. And that's just going to make it way easier for you. The next thing I have on my list is just a thermometer. So very important to have a thermometer when you're making cheese. Cheese making, we're going to pretty specific temperatures to meet our bacterial culture's needs as our cheeses ferment. And so if we are going way too high in our temperatures, we could potentially be killing off our cheese making starter cultures. And if we're going too low, we could make those cultures be dormant, so they're not going to be feeding and fermenting as quickly, which could cause problems in our making of our cheese. So thermometer, very important. You're going to want one that kind of ranges between, I would say, about 60 degrees all the way up to about 200 degrees, and most kitchen thermometers are going to be in that range, although I do have one that is not in that range. So just check, make sure that it runs through those ranges. And you can use any sort of kitchen thermometer that you have, but if you have used it for things like meat or bread baking, just make sure that you sterilize the tip of it really well before you go on to use it for cheese making. The next thing I have on the list is cheesecloth. So cheesecloth, you can probably make do with something that you have at home. I have 2 examples of cheesecloth here. So this one here is just a very light flour sack towel. I buy flour sack towels at Walmart, or on Amazon you can get them. They're my cheesecloth of choice. So I use flour sack towels almost exclusively in my cheese making for cheesecloths. You really want to make sure that you don't buy the cheesecloth that's at the grocery store. So if you go to the grocery store, you're probably going to find cheesecloth in the canning aisle, and that is a very thready type cheesecloth. It's got lots of little threads in it. I think it's used mostly for like jam making and stuff. It's not very good for cheese making, and you're going to end up with a lot of threads in your cheese if you use it. So flour sack towels are my favorite. You can also just use a clean old pillowcase or muslin baby blankets. Things like that are really make do that you can find around your house. If it's a Saturday, you don't want to go into the store, you're like, I'm just going to make some simple cheeses, you can use those for making those cheeses. And then this one here is called Ply-Ban cheesecloth. And if you really are struggling with your cheesecloth sticking to your cheese, there's lots of different reasons why cheesecloth might stick to your cheese, and usually something's going wrong in your cheese making that's going to adversely affect your cheese later on. So your cheesecloth getting stuck on it is kind of like a warning sign, like, oh, I need to change something in my cheese making so I'm able to make better cheese. But nonetheless, it is very frustrating when you have cheesecloth stick onto your cheese. So if you're just constantly struggling with that and you've kind of gone through all the troubleshooting things, I can't actually remember if I have a video on YouTube about stuck on cheesecloth. I think I have like some content on Instagram about it. There's definitely some content in my cheese making book on why cheesecloth might stick, but there's multiple different reasons. But if you're struggling with that, you've tried everything, and now you're here, Ply-Ban can be a really great choice for you. So cheesecloth, the cheese can't get stuck to Ply-Ban. I've never had it get stuck. It's this kind of porous sort of plastic material, and you can use it as a cheesecloth, so I use it in the same manner as this cheesecloth. I can just stick it in there and I can put my cheese in there. So yeah, you can get it at any cheese supply store. It's very inexpensive, it washes up really nice, so if you are struggling with the flour sack towels, try some Ply-Ban. It might be your new best friend. Lots of people also ask me, how do you clean your cheesecloth and keep it good for cheese making with the flour sack towels? My golden rule is that I always wash them just with hot soapy water right after, actually cold soapy water, then hot soapy water once you get all the debris off of them, right in the sink right after I'm done using them. Then I hang them up and just let them air dry, and then I'm going to throw them in the washing machine the next time I do a cheesecloth load. So that's kind of the way that I standardly look after cheesecloths, and then I'll hang them in the sun, usually after they get out of the washing machine, and that usually keeps them pretty nice. The sun is really good at keeping cheesecloths nice and clean. Eventually you might get to a point where they do start to have a bit of a smell, and so at that point I'll just take a bunch of them and I'll throw them in a boiling pot of water with about a tablespoon of baking soda and boil them in that pot for about 10 minutes, and then repeat my washing, hanging in the sun kind of thing, and that usually takes pretty good care of them. I don't like set out to have my cheesecloths last forever. I'm fine if, you know, I get quite a few cheeses out of them and then I gotta move on to another cheesecloth. That's why I like flour sack towels, because they are pretty inexpensive and I can move them on to being milk rags or something like that once they're done serving my needs as cheesecloths. The next thing that I think is a must-have if you are just starting cheese making and you're planning on making some pressed cheeses, and this is specific for pressed cheeses, is a cheese form and a follower. So this is called a follower, this is a cheese form, and they fit into each other. This can go on top, it's like a lid. Now, when I first started making cheese, and even when I started teaching cheese making, I told everybody, I was like, you can just make do with things that you have, because really when you look at this, it's not that different than, say, a bucket that has holes drilled in it, or a springform pan, things like that. So I kind of was like, you know, you can just make do with what you have, and then you can go and invest in a cheese form later on. I've thought about that more and more over the last couple of years, and I think that I actually now recommend everybody that is planning on making pressed cheese should actually buy a cheese form to start them out. And the reason for that is that they are really not that expensive. For example, I think this setup that I have is about $20. I bought them separately, but they're about $10 each, so really not too expensive. And the headache that it saves you from having to go around and find a follower that fits into it is immense. So I spent a lot of time in my cheese making just looking for something that would sit in there and have something on top of it, and it was just a lot of fiddling around. So just getting a cheese form is probably a good idea. If you are at home on a Saturday again and you just want to make some cheese, you don't have a cheese form, you can make do with, my favorite is the springform pan, and just it's because it comes with the follower. It has the bottom part that you can kind of rig up as a follower if you needed to. Now, I have a whole video on YouTube about how to choose a cheese form, and I will link that below. As a very general rule, you can kind of plan on getting about 1 pound of cheese per gallon of milk that you're planning on using. And that is a very, very general rule. Only the highest protein cows, the highest butterfat cows will actually give you that much cheese out of that much milk. So usually you're probably going to get about 0.5 of a pound per gallon of milk if you were kind of using store-bought milk or a lesser quality milk. So when I choose a cheese form, I try to kind of go with the amount of milk that I plan on processing, just like my pot. So if I plan on doing a lot of 4-gallon batches, I'm going to look for a cheese form that would work for about 3 to 4 pounds of cheese. So this is, for example, a 2-kilogram cheese form, I believe, or maybe it's I think it's like a 2-kilogram cheese form. So you can also see ones that are in pounds if you're in the States. So that's kind of how I picked the size of cheese form. And depending on the type of cheese that you're making and the milk, as I said, you're going to get different yields, but that's sort of to just figure out how much you need to get going. Also, so this one is kind of shorter, you can see. I like ones that are a little bit taller just because it gives you a little bit more grace period. If your batch is a little bit bigger, you can fit more inside it. So this isn't my favorite one just because it is a little bit short, and you sometimes end up with a few extra curds that you can't fit in because of it. So once you get a little bit fancier in your cheese making, you might want to make some different types of cheeses. For example, you might be wanting to make like some brie, or feta is a great beginner cheese actually, but some sort of soft cheeses. So there's lots of different types of cheese forms that you can get. This one's called a basket form. They usually come in like multi-packs. I got this one from Amazon in a pack of 3. They're very inexpensive as well. You can make soft cheese forms at home. So soft cheeses are cheeses that aren't going to be pressed. There's no pressure that's going to be applied to them, so they don't need a follower with them. So any cheese that's like that, you can really rig up using things that you have at home. And it is maybe nice to get a few designated cheese forms once you really figure out what the types of cheeses that you're planning on making are going to be. But you can use the cheese forms that you have from multiple different types of cheeses. For example, just because this is my cheese form that I use for making pressed cheeses doesn't mean that I could make a big brie in there. I just not use a follower lid, and I could use that to make a brie. So as I said, I talk more about choosing a cheese form in that video, and I'll link it down below. I also talk a lot about this in my book too. All right, the next thing on the list is something called a ripening container, and I actually have a cheese in this ripening container right now. So what this is there's a little mat on the bottom of this container, then it's a kind of Tupperware container, and I'm able to just loosely put the lid on it, and then I put this whole thing into my cheese cave, which is an area that runs between 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. And for me, that's just a refrigerator that has a separate thermostat controller on it. So I can put this whole thing into my cheese cave, and this is going to help me monitor the humidity of this cheese. And so I use it for when I'm naturally aging cheeses. For example, this cheese is a provolone. You can see that it's got some mold growth on it, but it's also got a pretty nice little rind on it. That's just a neglected, forgot to flip it, kind of little thing, but it's not going to affect the inside of the cheese. And so when I'm naturally aging a cheese, I will age them in these little ripening containers, and that makes me be able to control the humidity for a specific cheese, because I don't have humidity control in my aging area. Because it's a fridge and it's quite a large space, it's a little bit difficult to keep the humidity constant in there. So I just use these little containers, and then I'm able to do that. I also use these little containers as drying boxes. So I almost exclusively these days dry my cheeses in my cheese cave. So instead of just leaving them on a rack out on the counter, which I used to do and I still do sometimes if the temperature in the house isn't too warm, I now dry them in the cheese cave. And this just makes a more temperature controlled area, so that I'm not going to have issues with fermentation either happening too quickly or too slowly if it's too cold in the house. So quickly if it's too warm, slowly if it's too cold. So I just put it into the aging area and dry it in there, exact same setup, and that helps me to just make better cheese. So I really recommend that if you're planning on making any sort of cheeses that are going to be aged, you just invest in one of these. It came from the dollar store. You can see I have some that are only $1, but this one was $2.50. So they're really not that expensive. As far as the mat goes in the bottom, you can make do with a bunch of different things that you have. Sushi mats is something that people use a lot. This is an actual little mat from a cheese supply store, and they're not that expensive. You can get kind of big ones and cut them down to the size that you need if you want to, but lots of different ways to kind of rig up that mat underneath so that they have some airflow. And then the last thing that I have on my what I believe is the must-have list is a vacuum sealer. So if you're planning on aging cheese, you're new to making cheese, and you just don't have like a ton of time, I think that a vacuum sealer is an amazing way to be able to make a lot of really good cheese for your family. Not everyone agrees with this, but vacuum sealing and waxing is basically interchangeable. So most of my cheeses actually get vacuum sealed. The odd one I will naturally age, and it will develop its own rind. It's a little bit more work. I have to care for it. Whereas if I vacuum seal a cheese that's going to be aged, I vacuum seal it, throw it in my cheese cave. It's still in that temperature controlled area, and I'm just going to flip it. Well, really, you should flip it once a week. That's what I tell people, but I never flip them. But really, you should flip them once a week or whenever you think about it, and that will just help them to age a little bit more evenly. And then you just leave it in there until you're ready to eat it, and it ages cheeses really well. So any cheese that doesn't need a natural rind to form to age can be vacuum sealed. So cheeses like cheddar, Gouda, Colby, Alpine style cheeses, they can be vacuum sealed. Basically, if there's an option to wax it in your recipe, you could go to doing this. There is a few things that you might want to consider before vacuum sealing, or that I encourage you to consider before vacuum sealing. And I do have a separate video on that as well. It's a bit of an older video, but I think everything in it is still kind of relevant. Other than I might talk about drying more on the counter than drying in the boxes, I'm not sure. But just some tips on how to vacuum seal your cheeses with success in mind. So making sure that you're actually drying them enough. They do take a little longer to dry in the cheese cave. So where you might see that they're dry on the counter after about 2 days, it's probably going to take about 5 days in the ripening container in the cheese cave. But you want to make sure that they're sufficiently dry before you vacuum seal them. It's really a great way to preserve a lot of cheese for your family, and I don't think that I could manage the amount of cheese that I make for my family if I was having to wax everything. Another cool thing about vacuum sealing is that because it's kind of forming a skin on the surface of your cheese, you don't have to really worry about mold growth. Every once in a while you'll see the tiniest little bit of green mold on there. It's not a big problem at all. Just wash it off. But really, you're not seeing a lot of mold growth in vacuum sealed cheeses, and you're also not going to have to control humidity. So like this naturally aged cheese, I'm trying to keep the humidity of this cheese at about 85%. When I have vacuum sealed cheeses, I don't have to worry about that. No moisture is going to escape from them. Everything's locked in there. All right, and so the last one for the probably good idea to have a category would be an area that runs between 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. That cheese cave I talked about. As I said, mine is a converted refrigerator. I use something called an Inkbird thermostat controller that comes off Amazon, and it keeps the temperature of that fridge at 50 degrees Fahrenheit for me. People use wine fridges. You can use a cellar if it maintains at about that temperature. And if you don't have an area that is 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, you can use your regular refrigerator. Your cheeses are going to age a little bit slower, but it's not going to be a huge deal. I use my regular refrigerator to make cheese for a really long time, and I never had any issues with that. It was just I expected my cheeses to age a little slower. So these are your must-have items, or I really recommend you have items. And now we're going to look at some items that I bet you already have in your kitchen that are going to be useful for when making cheese. All right, so this is the category of things you probably already have in your kitchen that you can kind of use for cheese making, but also use for other things. So the first one I have on the list is strainers. You can see I have quite a few different strainer sizes here. And the reason for that is because I make so much cheese, it's actually really handy to have different sizes of strainers. Most of these I thrifted, actually all of them I thrifted just at the thrift store, so I can have some different sizes. I also use these for all sorts of other things in my kitchen. I'm not using them exclusively for cheese making. I just make sure I wash them really good after I'm done using them for something else, or sanitize them. I like going stainless steel so that you can sanitize them. Next thing would be a rack with a pan underneath. So you can see this is just a cookie rack. Came from the dollar store. I use this for cheese making. So I use this as a drying rack for making like pressed cheeses. After I pull them out of the press, I'm going to dry them on here sometimes, or like I said before, I'm going to dry them in those drying containers or ripening containers. What I use them more often for is for actually draining moisture cheeses like bries or fetas that aren't going to have any pressure. They're just going to be sitting in their forms and draining for about 12 hours or so. So I'll put this rack over top of a pan, and I didn't grab a pan, but I'll use a cookie sheet, or I'll use those higher walled glass pans, like I don't know what they're called. They're like a casserole dish. I'll use those more often because they're deeper dish, and when I'm making soft cheeses like brie or feta, they're going to lose a lot of weight from them as they drain, and so that's going to have me not having to come back as frequently to drain that pan. It's also easier to drain them without spilling weight everywhere. If you ever have tried to empty a cookie sheet of whey, it is very difficult without making a mess. Spoons. So stainless steel would be the material of choice for best cleanliness. I do have a designated cheese spoon because I do a lot of natural cheese making where I'm keeping a clabber culture and I'm using natural techniques in my cheese making. I try to exclusively use the spoon for cheese. I try not to let it touch anything else in the kitchen as far as food goes, although sometimes my family will scoop it up before I can stop them. But the reason for that is that wood is really good at harboring bacteria, and it can harbor good bacteria and it can harbor bad bacteria as well. And so traditionally in cheese making, a lot of times the tools that were used in cheese making were actually the culture for the cheeses. So if I exclusively use the spoon for cheese making, whenever I use it, even though I'm washing it when I'm done, it's impossible to sterilize it. It's too porous. There's too much little pores in this wood. And so if I exclusively use it for cheese making, the starter cultures that I'm using in my cheese making are going to start to live on the spoon. And maybe they won't be living, but they'll basically be dormant. And so when I start to use this in my cheese making, then those cultures are going to come alive and they're actually going to culture my batch of cheese. So I like to do natural materials for that reason. Same thing, you saw that I have those clay cheese forms, I think of those in the same way, that they're also going to be culturing my cheeses. So it's kind of a fun thing to do if you're into natural cheese making and you're into learning about it. But if you're really wanting to be stringent with your sterility, I recommend going with stainless steel because you can sterilize it and sanitize it, and you're not going to have any of those little cultures or bacteria living on your spoon. Same thing with the whisk. So I have this wooden handle one. I actually tried not to use this one too much. It's too hard to clean in the crevice. I have another one, I just don't know where it is right now. But whisks you probably already have in your kitchen. You're not going to use whisks for too many types of cheese, but usually thermophilic style cheeses like Parmesans, Asiagos, Alpines, the curds are cut by using a whisk. So having a whisk is a handy little tool. Measuring cups and spoons. And so same thing, I like these to be stainless steel or glass, something that's easy to clean unless I'm exclusively going to use them for cheese making. But I don't just exclusively use these for cheese making. They're for all of my kitchen duties. And because they're stainless steel, I actually don't think this is stainless steel. It's probably aluminum, what I said not to do. But not enough stuff is touching. I'm pretty good at that. Yeah, so I use them for everything. They're just really easy to clean so that I'm not having to worry about contamination in my cheese making. So these things are things that you probably already have in your kitchen that you can pull out and use in your cheese making and kind of double purpose them. And now I want to talk about things that are nice to have, but you don't need right off the bat when you get started cheese making. The first one is something called a hygrometer. I never say it right. Hygrometer, which is just a little meter that is going to measure humidity in your aging area. I have lots of these little guys. Most of them just don't have the cord attached. Most of them are just little boxes. And I'll throw them into my ripening containers in my cheese cave, and they will tell me what humidity it is in those boxes. And as I said, for different cheeses, I'm aiming for different humidities, but for most of them, I'm aiming for about 85% when I'm naturally aging them. So this just helps me know what's going on in the box. If I need to raise the humidity, I can go ahead and add in, say, a wet, crumpled up piece of paper towel, and that will rise the humidity. If I need to lower the humidity, I can wipe down the sides of the boxes. I can make the lid a little bit more ajar, and that will help me lower the humidity. So it's a good measuring tool, although I made of cheese for a lot of years without having them. They're pretty cheap, and I kind of would recommend getting them if you're planning on doing a lot of natural cheese making, or naturally aged cheese making, I should say. The next one is a kitchen scale. So I actually use my kitchen scale almost exclusively for cheese making. I don't really use it at any other point in my kitchen. I would if I had something else to use it for, but I really just use it for cheese making. I use it for weighing my cheeses and then salting them accordingly. It's way better to salt your cheeses by their weight versus just by what the recipe says, because you're going to have such different yields for the quality of your milk. So different cows are going to give different yields in their cheese making, and this helps you to be a little bit more accurate and make better cheeses. And then finally, the cheese press. So I have a fancy Dutch cheese press. You've probably seen me use it before. I've had a lot of different cheese presses throughout my time, and it's kind of dirty right now. As I said, I'm not making cheese, so I would definitely sanitize this before I use it for cheese making. But my cows are dry right now. Anyways, I love the Dutch press. If you are really looking to invest in a good cheese press, the Dutch press is it. I love it. I've tried all of the different cheese presses out there. Well, not all of them, but pretty much all the different styles, and this is the best one. And the reason that I think it's the best one is because it is just so darn easy to put your cheese in there. All you have to do is really lift up the handle. You can put your cheese in there, put your weights on the end, which I find gauging the weight for it is super simple. And then you can just pull it out in half an hour when you need to redress it, and it's just really easy. I love the Dutch press. But if you are just getting started and you don't want to invest in this ginormous big tool that you're not even sure if you're going to like this new hobby of cheese making, making a bucket press is a really great way to rig up a press. So I'm always impressed seeing people's presses that they rig up for their families, but bucket presses are really awesome, simple style presses. Let me grab my book and I'll show you. So in my cheese making book, I show you how to do a bucket press, and I'll just find it here. And I talk about how to use all different presses. So there's an example of me using the bucket press, but I see how to make it. Let's see. This is a common sense chart for determining how much weight to apply to your cheese. I was excited about that in there. So depending on the type of press that you have, whether it's a bucket press, a Dutch press, one of those spring or crank down presses, it kind of gives you a chart on how to use it properly. And then it shows you like how much weight that you should be putting on and how to figure it out simply. I'm getting distracted. I'm looking for the bucket press. I want to just show you a photo example because I don't have any 5-gallon buckets in the house right now. Oh, here we go. All right, so how to make a bucket press. It teaches you in the book, and I think I have a video on it. I think I have a YouTube video. If I do, I will link it down below, but just I want to show you how simple it is. So it's 2 5-gallon buckets. Someone was concerned about me using black plastic. The cheese isn't actually touching the buckets, so I mean, worry about that if you want to. Food safe is probably best. Anyways, 2 5-gallon buckets that fit into each other loosely, like they should be able to move up and down really easily. And then you're going to put your cheese form in there, so you can see at the bottom there's the cheese form, and then a can or something else on top of it. Sometimes you don't even need to because the follower lid is so high that you don't even need to put anything else in there. Then you're going to put your top bucket down, and then you're going to fill it with warm whey or warm water to a certain level. So if you want light pressure, you're only going to fill it like a quarter full. If you want medium pressure, half full. If you want high pressure, 3/4 or almost full. And so that is a really simple way to DIY a press at home without having to have any fancy things. And so I would recommend doing that when you're first starting cheese making, just because it allows you to see if you like it, and then invest in something that's a little bit fancier later on. If you're looking for a Dutch press, I have contacts. I'm not affiliated with any of these people. People ask me all the time, where do you get your Dutch press? The guy that made my Dutch press, I don't believe he makes them any longer. But if you're in Canada, I have a contact for you. And if you are in the United States, I have a contact for you as well. So you could just email me at cheesefromscratch@outlook.com, and I will send you their contact information if you're looking at ordering one. Yeah, I love my Dutch press. It's a good thing. All right, so I hope I didn't forget anything. I think I probably covered most of the things that you're going to be using for most of the different cheeses that you can make. There are some fancier things that I have. For example, this is a curd cutter. Lots of people ask me, how do you get your curds so even? And this is part of the reason, but I don't use this all the time. A lot of the times I just go under the curds with a knife or with a spatula or a skimmer, and I just try to get the curds as even as possible, and then later on when I'm stirring them, I just keep a butter knife beside me and I just cut them down to size as I'm stirring. So that's kind of the more common method that I use. I do have this designated curd cutter. I use it sometimes. It's really hard to clean. So this one I bought on Etsy. Same person that made my Dutch press that I absolutely love, and I do love this too. It's just really hard to clean. So if you have one like this, it's just fishnet. Just make sure you clean it right after you use it. You can't sterilize them. They're just not something that you can sterilize. So if that's something that you really want to be diligent about, this type is probably not the one that you would look for. This is the cheapest one that you can get that I know of. All of the other ones, like the ones that you're going to see on cheese supply stores and stuff, they're very expensive. I've seen people recommend using like a cookie rack or like a drying rack that kind of looks like this, that doesn't have the ones that go down, that just has the horizontal ones, and they'll just drag that through their pot. So that would be easier to sanitize if you wanted to do that. When you use these, this is a side note, but when you use these, you can't just like really go slow. You have to like plop it down and go really fast. So if you're using a drying rack as well in that method, plop her down, drag her across really fast, and that will get your curds to be a little bit more even. So that's an example of something that I have. I don't use super often. Would I buy it again? maybe I'd probably buy this again. Another example of something that I have that I probably wouldn't buy again, but maybe I would, I don't know, I just don't use it enough, is one of those automatic stirrers. So I have the StirMate one. I like it. It stirs the pot of curds, and I have the extender arm so it can get all the way to the bottom. It just automatically stirs it. You do have to come back every few minutes though and reach down and unclump some of the curds, because it just can't, it's not like a spoon or a hand or an arm. It can't directly target all of the different curds. So I end up going back a lot to get the curds broken up and make sure that it's stirring properly. And that's not my favorite. So I think some people really enjoy them though too. So I guess just personal preference. I have a couple other like random things too. I have like 50 pounds of wax, cheese wax, that I bought when I was back when I was waxing cheeses before I knew that you could vacuum seal them. And I bought this massive block of wax, and then shortly after that I realized that you could vacuum seal cheeses, and so I stopped waxing my cheeses, and so ever since then I've had 50 pounds of wax just sitting on my shelf in the pantry. So if you're local to me and you want 50 pounds of wax, I have that for you. But anyways, I don't use cheese wax, some people do, and it's personal preference as well. I just find it too messy, and I find vacuum sealing basically does the same thing. So that was something that I have a lot of that I never used. Cream wax is another one. So cream wax is a little bit different than regular paraffin cheese wax, in that you usually paint it on, and it acts as a barrier for mold, but it doesn't really control the humidity as well. So usually you're going to paint it on and then even still have your cheese like in a ripening box, or you might wax it over top of that cream wax, and it will just help with as a mold barrier. So that's another option too, of something that I don't use very often. I have some fancier, well, they're not fancier. I have a shoe brush that I use all the time for my naturally aged cheeses, so that's something that I do use, but unless you're making a lot of naturally aged cheeses, you can get that as you go, so just a soft bristled brush. I have these dollar store fly mats that I use all the time, or fly nets. These are awesome. I recommend getting ones that will go over your entire cheese, so all the way to the bottom, no rack underneath, so that flies can't get up in there. And you really want to be careful about flies in your cheese making, especially in the summer months. So there's certain cheeses that I don't really even make in the summer months because of fly concerns. For example, I don't make a ton of brie in the summer. I just find them way too difficult to keep the flies off of in this old farmhouse that we live in. You probably can't see the fly tape that's like right here. Swing her in. Yeah, so old farmhouse, want to be careful of flies. Flies love milk, and they will find your house. If you are making cheese, they will find it. Yeah, I think that is everything. I have a whole equipment section in my book as well, just to be real salesy for you guys. But just in all like joking aside, it is nice to have like a full-on list, and that's why this week I wrote a blog post. Just it goes through each item. So this week I wrote a blog post, so if you don't want to buy my book, there's no pressure. But you can find that blog post down below on all the things that I love for cheese making, a little bit more detail about some of the things that I don't love as much, and you can just find that full list in the blog post down below. So thank you guys for watching my video. If you haven't already, like and subscribe, and come back next Monday because I post a new video almost every Monday, not every Monday, but I'm going camping next weekend, so I might not post one next Monday. We'll see. Anyways, I post a video most Mondays on all things cheese making, milk cows, and dairy processing, and I would love to have you guys here. All the links will be down below. Links for my book, links for the blog post, links for the videos that I mentioned, unless I forget to add them in, and I will see you guys next week. Bye!